All right, this is the second video related to Chapter 6, the focus of which is motivating others. All right, so I am starting on page 3 of the lecture outline with Roman numeral 6, where it says the basic model of motivation. Now, this is something that is not covered in your text, so you will want to make sure that you're paying very close attention. All right, so the basic model of motivation says that motivation starts with an unsatisfied need. Okay, it's always about an unsatisfied need. That unsatisfied need leads to tension, a feeling of tension. That tension leads to goal-directed behavior. If that goal is achieved, then we go back to the next unsatisfied needs. And human beings are pretty much perpetually unsatisfied. So there's always another need that arises. If, on the other hand, there isn't any goal achievement, that will lead to frustration and a feeling of dissatisfaction, at which point a person has a choice. They can engage in constructive behavior, which is basically using one's voice, doing something positive and active to try and address one's frustration and dissatisfaction. Or, if a person chooses not to engage in constructive behavior, they might instead choose to engage in defensive behavior, which can include withdrawal, basically stepping away, aggression, which is just as you would think it would be, sort of aggressively being negative, regression, which is reverting to a childlike state, or rationalization, which is coming up with something that seems like a good explanation for one's behavior. So let's do some quick examples. So first one. Let's imagine that you're hungry. You're very, very hungry. That is your unsatisfied need. This causes you to feel tension, right? How do you know? Well, you can feel your stomach making noises, feel sort of empty. Maybe you're having a hard time staying focused. You're easily distracted. It's hard to sit there in class, perhaps, or wherever you happen to be. All you can think about is, oh, I am so hungry. I'm hungry. I'm hungry. I'm hungry. Okay. So you decide to engage in goal-directed behavior. You take yourself over, perhaps, to the commons. I will get myself something to eat. You get there, you have your ID, there's money on your card, so cha-ching, you are able to go and get some food. Goal achieved. Fantastic. You're no longer hungry. Now you can move on to the next thing that's on your mind, the next unsatisfied need. Maybe I need to study or whatever it is. But let's imagine instead that you got over to the commons and you realized, yeah, you don't have your ID. You don't have any money. Now what? Now what? So you had this unsatisfied need where you're hungry, you're feeling tension. You decided to engage in goal-directed behavior. You took yourself over to the commons and you realize you have no way to buy any food. No goal achievement. Now, most of us are going to feel some frustration, some dissatisfaction at that point. You might choose to engage in constructive behavior. Constructive behavior could include something as simple as asking somebody else if they could lend you some money. Or maybe you go back to where you live and you find your card or your car or wherever you might have a source of money, and then you come back and then you can go back to achieving your goal and life is good and you move on to the next unsatisfied need. Or instead of that constructive behavior, you might decide to engage in defensive behavior. So withdrawal in this particular example might be something like you just deciding, I'm not going to eat anything. I'm just going to feel sorry for myself. Aggression, you might get angry and you might say to the person letting people into the Michael's Commons, well, you know me. Tomorrow when I come or later on when I come, just swipe my card twice. And you might be really rude about it. You might be really insistent. You might be really demanding, crabby. Regression, you might decide to go into a full-blown snit, a full-blown tantrum, a complete pout. Throw yourself on the floor. I'm so hungry. I can't stand it. I'm so hungry. And you act like a child, basically. That's what regression is. Rationalization is maybe, in this case, you tell yourself, you know what? This is what I get for not remembering to bring my money. and now I have to live with the consequences. So, and you know what? I could afford to lose a few pounds anyway. So it's just as well. It's just as well that I have no money with me. Okay, that's one example of the basic model of motivation. Now, let me use another. Let me use a work example. So, going back to the beginning, the unsatisfied need, let's say, is that you don't really have a good sense from your boss about whether he or she thinks that you're performing at an adequate level. So that's your unsatisfied need. You haven't had a performance evaluation. You haven't gotten any real feedback from your boss. So you're feeling a little tension, like, geez, I wonder, how am I doing? I mean, am I doing okay? Am I on top of things? Or is this person unhappy with me? Am I on the verge of maybe getting reprimanded or fired, etc., etc.? So goal-directed behavior, you say, I'm going to do something about this. I'm not going to wait to find out. Okay? I'm just going to ask my boss. So you say to the boss, could we meet? So we could talk about how I'm doing in terms of my performance, if I'm on track or not. And the boss says, sure, yeah, absolutely. Come on in my office right now. Let's sit down. Wonderful. That need becomes satisfied. Great. But what if it didn't? What if when you asked the boss, could I meet? Could we talk about my performance? And the boss said, I don't actually have time right now. In fact, I'm not sure when I'll have time. Now you're not going to be achieving the goal that you had. And so that's going to cause you to feel some frustration, some dissatisfaction. It might dwell. You might be thinking about that at work for the rest of the day. Did I not handle that well? What should I do differently, etc.? Now, at this point, you might decide to engage in constructive behavior. So, for example, and again, remember, this is positive and active. You decide, you know what, I'll ask one of my colleagues in a nice way, very gentle way. Hey, I tried to meet with the boss to talk about, my performance. I really just want to get a sense of how I'm doing. And maybe the colleague says, well, sure, I can tell you. I think you're doing great, and here's a thing or two that you might do a little bit differently, but otherwise I think you're right on track. You're very consistent with what most people do in their first year and so on. Awesome. Need satisfied. On to the next unsatisfied need. But what if instead of engaging in constructive behavior, you decided to engage in defensive behavior? So instead of, coming up with another way to positively deal with the fact that you haven't been able to get this feedback, you decide to do something negative. Withdrawal is where maybe you decide, well, you know what? Clearly the boss didn't want to talk to me. I must not be doing very well. So you start coming in later to work. Maybe you leave early. Maybe you take more breaks or longer breaks. Or maybe you're just not really dialed in. You're not really checked in. You're not giving everything, your absolute best. That's withdrawal. Maybe you decide to be aggressive. You go out of your way to not do your best work. And maybe you engage in fights with your coworkers, for example. Regression is you decide to behave again like a child. So this is where you throw a tantrum. Maybe you go and you tell your coworkers, our boss sucks, and you're basically throwing a fit. Why do I even work here? I asked for a simple thing. You think I could get something as simple as, yeah, you're doing a good job, or no, you're not doing a good job. And finally, rationalization might be something as simple. Well, you know what? I probably don't want to hear what the boss says anyway, because it's kind of a jerk and probably wouldn't tell me anything terribly useful. So it's just as well that he didn't want to meet with me. Okay, so that's the basic model of motivation. Hopefully it makes good sense. Come up with your own examples. Walk through the model. Make sure you start from unsatisfied need, go all the way through, do the if this, then that, ors, come up with your own examples. All right. So near the bottom of page 3, Roman numeral 7, what are the elements of an effective motivation program? So as it says, motivation programs must attend to the relationship between 4 factors. Okay, now this is in response to people who said things like satisfaction leads to performance. It's a nice simple thing, just make people happy and they'll perform well. False. Far more research discovered that in fact it was the other way around, that when you make people, when they're productive, that makes them happy. So how do we put all these pieces together? Well, as it turns out, the most likely relationship looks like this. Motivation leads to performance, which leads to outcomes, okay, rewards that are contingent on that performance, which leads to satisfaction. So people are likely to be satisfied as a result of performance when there are rewards that are in fact, rewards that they care about, that are in fact contingent on their performance. All right, top of page 4, B. The relationship between motivation and performance requires the leader to establish clear performance expectations. This is essential. Why? Because a lack of motivation is a learned response. People aren't born motivated. That's bogus, okay? This lack of motivation is often fostered by misunderstood or unrealistic expectations. So how do we handle this? Well, the best tool for establishing expectations is going to be goal setting, okay? Locke and Latham were the first to describe this. The date that you see on your lecture outline is 1990, but in fact, Locke was studying this in the late 1960s. It says that goals enhance performance because they energize our efforts. Okay, so they get us moving. They direct our attention, which means they help us to make choices. Am I going to spend my time this way or this way? And they encourage both persistence and strategy development. So they keep us motivated, they keep us focused, and they help us to figure out how should we move forward. Now, there are 3 critical components. First, a process that somehow encourages followers to buy into the goals, sometimes through their involvement in setting those goals. Second, making sure that the goals are specific, consistent with other goals, and appropriately challenging, typically difficult. The relationship between how difficult the goals are and how effective they are is a positive linear one. So the more difficult, the more effective, the greater the performance. Goals need to be SMART, okay? That's an acronym for specific, so as specific as possible. Measurable, has to be measurable. Attainable, realistic, and time-bound. So, it's not okay to say something like, we'd like to have a good season, or I'd like to lose weight, or I want to be a really good student, or I want to be a great employee. None of those is specific enough. None of them is measurable. We don't know if they're attainable or realistic, and none has a time limitation associated with them. So as a result, these things are not going to be motivating. They are not going to work. Instead, we could pick something like, with weight loss, I want to lose 10 pounds by the end of the semester. Now, that's specific. I'm articulating exactly how much. It's measurable because I can use a scale in order to assess that. I can keep track of that on a weekly basis, if you will, to give myself feedback on whether I'm making progress towards my goal. Attainable, 10 pounds is probably, something that if I exercise and watch diet and so on and so forth, I could achieve that. Realistic in that I'm giving myself enough time to make this happen. I'm not saying I want to lose 10 pounds by the end of the week or anything like that. And then time bound, I've said by the end of the semester. You need to come up with your own examples of goals that are SMART. Okay. And then the third component that helps to make goals effective is feedback. Feedback, feedback, feedback. I'll say that many, many times. You'll hear me say that many, many times. Feedback that clarifies expectations, that adjusts the goal difficulty, and provides recognition. So people need to know where they're at with respect to their goals. All right. C. The relationship between motivation and performance also requires the leader to remove personal and organizational obstacles to performance. Why? Well, because facilitation rather than control helps to create a supportive, problem-solving work environment. Remember, that's what we're all about. We're all about solving problems. So, relevant theory, path goal. This was originally described by House and Mitchell in 1974, and this basically gives us a nice framework for removing obstacles. The theory says that there are 4 leadership styles. First is directive. Basically, with directive leadership, I tell you what to do, exactly what to do. Supportive is, I don't tell you what to do, I just tell you you're awesome. Participative is, I involve you in deciding what the goals should be. And achievement focused is, I set really high, difficult goals. Okay? So directive is, do this. Supportive is, you're awesome. Participative is, let's figure this out together. And achievement focused is, we're going to be the best of the best of the best. All right. So the theory, as it says near the bottom of page 4 of your lecture outline, focuses on 3 questions. And I'm suggesting that you see table 6.3. How much help is needed to complete the task? Key contingency factors will be task structure and task difficulty. Basically, for example, an easy and highly structured task doesn't require someone to be directive. A person could be supportive in that regard or participative. Second, how much direction do the followers expect? Key contingency factors. The followers' desire for autonomy, so how much do they want to make decisions themselves, along with their ability and experience. Individuals who value autonomy, as it says, desire a participative leadership style. They want to be involved in making the decision. Ditto if they have an internal locus of control. People with an internal locus of control, they really want to participate in goal setting. Okay? They think they have something to offer. And finally, how much support is available from other sources? Key contingency factors, the availability of organizational standards, rewards, and controls. Okay, so it says the leader's involvement should complement, not duplicate, organizational sources of support. Okay. All right. This takes us to the end of this second video.